Microphones are on now, so.
Oh, good.
Behave ourselves, right?
Right.
Appreciate that, you know,
Rumble.
unless it
Even
comes
to
from
yourself,
where
it's
I
likely to
have
get picked up.
And I would say contact you first, and then it would not be that way. So,
Conversation with us all at the beginning about programming stuff, and then Chris did just sales at the delivery session and gave me completely different information. So I don't know who's not.
Transfer station.
yes, I can be very transparent with you about math. So,
Can you? Okay.
yes, I'm more than happy to answer fact information.
Sporadically get sick on Tuesday.
No, in fact, we,
I just told nobody was doing it because it's too mixed.
no, and I would tell you that first of all, with Clay Cal's measuring position and math specialists,
Yeah.
we accelerated for the first time we have a seventh grade class, taking algebra for class.
We're talking about that, so,
That's what I.
where is the original grant?
I made clear.
Just, I didn't change the agenda, but was gonna bring it up under new business.
And also we did a summer kids were on the cusp, we said.
For the eighth graders.
I know all those, but yeah.
She introduced herself.
Oh, she did, okay.
Put it this way, we would never say no to seventh grade, but then the students would have to realize the impact when they're in their class and the other.
Includes all the stuff we
If they think it's too much.
So I come from September, and my son is very good, asking about thinking about it. I was pretty much told no, that was only true if
I
you
remember
were
there was a whole bunch of money for the internal stuff,
fifth grade. I
annual
think
meetings.
this is what I was told.
So I would like to.
Clearly not true.
What I would appreciate is if you would give me that kind of summary
Okay.
interaction, and then I would be able to do my philosophy is been, as we said, is in many kids, recognizing some phone calls, what that challenging is, and usually the response was, and the explained part was to get more into the school, because it's school,
Nice rules and regs.
the only thing you can say.
All right, well,
Close the first one, which would be ages.
So scores.
Yes.
It's a full announcement, right?
Yes.
No, it's not the answer. It should be based on that, not based on the complaint.
all right,
So, all right, thank you.
okay, all right, thanks a lot. We ready? That's okay. We're only one bit late. I think that's okay.
Ready?
So I call the meeting to order. This is Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. First order of business, public comment. If anybody has a comment, please come up to the podium. Address your comments to the board, not to the audience, and you have 3 minutes. No takers. Appointments. First person, what? First person up is Dr. Shaps.
And I gave Chief
Oh,
Dunstall my
okay.
copy, so I mean, I'd be happy to go.
How about if we,
He should be back.
Yes, I mean, you wanna wait a minute?
Yeah, we'll
So I can-
You can have mine.
Oh, okay, well, I mean,
mean,
that's
not
great.
have
Would
it,
you-
have
Are
it,
we
but-
here, or here, where would you like me to stand?
It says
The
the
podium
microphone,
is
so right
best
here.
because the microphone gets you, if you turn.
Absolutely,
It's
so,
on.
and I do have a couple extra copies, if I can just give as a one-sheet summary. I just wanted to make sure in the audience that you have this. There's a PowerPoint
One is
as
enough.
well.
One is
Okay,
enough.
thank you. So thank you for, and I apologize, I know we had to reschedule, and had looked forward to just giving you a summary of our budget process and the budget prior to deliberative. And the reason I provided you with a handout is that during the deliberative, there was a change by the legislative body in terms of the proposed budget that was discussed, and I'll speak to that directly. But I think to begin with, I had a handout in the presentation, and whereas I certainly in Durham and Mary didn't touch on all the academic summaries and information, be more than happy to answer any question. It's obviously helpful in terms of, the budget for us is a financial articulation of what we hope to accomplish in terms of the experience of our students, and certainly being able to point to some data around success. And one in particular, we continue to see a positive trend around students interested in CTE education, and I think that's important because part of that connection is to really say, how do we put students first? So we have been, the board has been approving an increase in program expenditures for CTE as the student population has grown steadily each year. And so I think that's a good through line in terms of the first few pages of academic highlights that I just wanted to touch on. So higher concentration of students taking AP courses and exams, early college, we continue to have those relationships and so on, but the CTE and the ELOs, which is extended learning opportunity, is really continues also to be very special and important because it makes a connection for kids to investigate potential areas of study, but also professional direction, and really have the opportunity to get that type of experience overall. I think next, really, what I want to just talk about are enrollment trends, and I think that's important for me because it in some ways speaks to really our thinking about not only next year, but the next several years. The good news is that we've seen a steady increase over the last 4 years in the number of students from Lee, part of the school system. I think it's positive on page, jump ahead, but on page 8, you'll see we, for this current school year, 713 students overall in terms of where we are. But since 2021, it's been about positive 42 students. So you've had a steady growth. Well, there's been, I would say, a slight decline in Durham students, as well as a slight adjustment in Madbury. So there's a consistent, I would say, 4 or 5 year trend of more students from Lee participating in the cooperative. And I know that when it comes to our formula, but also adequacy, there's been an increase to the town of Lee based on the enrollment projections, and that's the trend. But going back a page, I just wanted to comment that Massway, we continue. We are, just overall this year, there are 20 regular general classrooms for Massway, and all 20 are in use. So we're at full occupancy relative to class sizes and pretty much 4 sections per grade, and we anticipate that would continue for the near term. So, and also included this year for the first time, we moved 13 kindergarten students, Mohammed zone students, into kindergarten at Massway because we changed last spring. The board supported a new policy around elementary school assignment, which has a whole bunch of criteria about balancing optimal function of our elementary schools and allows us to register students and then determine where is there space and opening in the short term, which is the short term kind of reaction to our schools becoming full at both places. At Mohammed, there are 17 regular classroom spaces. They had, years back, they had the modular classrooms, but when you remove that, they actually have 17, and that kind of lead me into the warrant for the bond that I'll talk about in a minute. But just overall, any questions about, overall, I would say in the near term, we see stable enrollment in terms of overall K-12, especially at the high school with the Barrington agreement. We're, been at about 800, a little bit above 800, and we'll continue. The biggest change is the middle school. We've seen a 15% drop, or anticipate next year over a 5-year period would be a 17% reduction, about 115 less students over that 5-year period, and that's just because cohorts coming through the system. As larger cohorts are exiting the middle school and going into the high school, they've been followed by smaller cohorts. So that is really reflective of the change at the middle school overall.
So this year's kindergarten cohort is bigger than previous?
So
kindergarten
this year
cohort?
is at 130.
Yeah.
Last year is close to 140.
Okay. No.
But in both cases, they exceeded projections. So we were, if you recall, prior to my arrival in the spring of '24, after the year's rate, there was about 17 or 18 additional Mohammed kindergarten, and the issue was where could we fit them in, and that kind of led into the discussion about more space. So the last 2 cohorts have been higher than expected. And I would say where we are now, it's interesting. This year, going forward for September, they had said all the models talked about 117, 18 kindergarten students, and we've already registered 116 as of 2 weeks ago. So we still have, I'd say 5-6 months to go, and we typically see now this pattern of one this week to the next week, all the way up through the start of school. So I think we're probably on that same course of more than expected, at least. And that's why I think we are committed to the elementary renovation project, which I'll get to in a minute, because we still see the unpredictability around what we think the estimates and projections say, and what we're seeing in terms of choice and so on for people moving into and accessing the school system.
So we would expect the middle school enrollment to go back up when this group of kids makes it that way?
Yeah, I think what's gonna happen is the middle school is going to decline for the next couple of years and then start to gradually go back. If you look at the long-term models, it's gonna come back. That's really what, at least if we say there is some credibility to projections overall.
On the Barrington one, with respect to tuition students, it looks pretty much the same. It's kind of flat, 165 all the way up to 176, and I think there's some of the projection, maybe 800 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that, I guess I'm trying to ask the question, is that, how's that split up? I mean, part goes here and a part goes there, do they just make a choice to come here?
Yeah, so the way is, the agreement talks about 50 students, and actually we just had last year extended another 5 years and gradually increased the number that we would allow it. The truth of the matter is, the last couple of years, anybody who's wanted to come, there's room for that. And it's been in the, I'd say mid-40s up to 50 each year, because they have choice with Dover and Co-Brown as well. And so some of it's because of the CTE program, some of it may be because of Co-Brown, and so I can't say of the 80-something students or 90 students, what's the breakdown, but we've had anywhere from, I'd say 43, thank you, Chief, 43 to 50 students per, thank you so much, per year regular, steady, and that's why if you, over 4 grades, keeping that 45 to 50, it's about 200, overall.
Do you expect it to increase?
I really don't. It's hard to say. There's so many things up in the air relative to open enrollment and other things. I think, we're planning each year on the same, that 45 to 50 number of students. And so I know that Barrington is having an increase in population growth in that area, though the elementary grades right now, I think for next year, their first, second is a little bit down in enrollment, but, so it's hard to say.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, Dr. Shep, one thing you mentioned in terms of 13 students come from Mohammed to Mass Way, are you still doing the thing where if a sibling is at a particular elementary and another sibling comes along, you put those two together?
Yeah.
Still do that?
Yeah, so what we committed to in the new policy is that if you have a sibling, for example, at Mass Way or Meharmet, we wouldn't identify, even if you were identified as being a student because of the variables of transportation and things like that, we would not ask that student to go. We are respecting the idea of the sibling currently enrolled. We had a family that said, well, they graduated last year on the 5th grade, and the language is very clear, that it's really saying, because we would want siblings to be together and convenience and stuff like that, we wouldn't, unless they wanted to. Unless they, or in the case of a specialized program, where we only deliver at one school, we'd have to say, in order to access that program, you would have to break the family. Okay. So that's enrollment. I just, just overall, so you have a picture. Would you like this back?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, if you have,
Yes. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
And then I'll give you the rest of it, so I don't want to.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you have this, right? Perfect. And I just want to introduce Matt Bacon, who's the chair of our school board, is here. Thank you. So just, I would say, overall facts about the budget to summarize. It certainly provides the resources for mandated programs and services. Obviously, that's something that is a non-starter for us in terms of ensuring we comply with mandates. We maintain favorable class size relative to the board's guidelines for class sizes, and that is one of the challenges around variable space and the number of classrooms. Certainly, this budget addresses the needs of safety, planned improvements, and I'll get to that, transportation services, and I'll touch on that. And also, it supports an expansion of courses at the high school, but more so a lot of mandates around curriculum. For example, the biggest one I would say is we are mandated to have in place by September a research-based new ELA program, K-6. And so with that comes expenditures in terms of for materials and professional development. And so that's an example where a lot of the mandates that really are not decided locally, we are certainly, including that within the budget itself. And then I just want to, just on page 11, if I could touch on it, we are focusing on strengthening math practices, K-8, I mentioned the ELA, but also adding a number of new courses. There was a change in the 306s at the state level last year. A lot of that is in some ways directed, adding particular courses without getting into detail. Having a statistics course, which we already do, a financial literacy course and things like that. There are things that we are responding to and also things that we're interested in, expanding the number of AP courses. We just started a original science research course, which is a multi-year course where students will hopefully work, and some of them already have, inside labs next to scientists, also social sciences, where they're actually conducting research and being part of that process, and hopefully will have opportunities either be an author or publishing and or present their research. And so we're looking to make those commitments. We are obligated to have and certainly believe in implementing the behavioral intervention risk assessment framework to ensure proactively that we're identifying students at risk. And there's resources that are in the budget for this. And we have started piloting the use of AI software. It's minimal costs. It's really, we're piloting both for students and for our staff. And as we talked about earlier, I know, but it's actually twofold. It's one, to, in a controlled environment, allow efficiency for teachers to do a lot of the things that they do normally as a resource, but also helping students kind of start to understand this world that is about AI in a very respectful way and a productive way. And we've been piloting it at all levels, and the feedback from students about the impact has been really well received. And so we're going to continue on that path. And that's part of this budget, but it's a very small fraction of it. So during on page 12, I'm going to say, we started the process, the budget development process in the fall. We had a number of series of budget workshops. And when in November, we realized where we were in terms of our rollover budget, there was a significant increase in investment in plant improvement, and I'll talk about that. And that, for us, that led to really hard decisions about the budget. And in our deliberations, we identified close to 1.1 million in reductions. Part of that was identified through removing projects within our operating budget for plant improvements. And the other thing was a reduction in staff, really driven by enrollment, or a decline in enrollment in the middle school, and just positions like academic support where they started during COVID, post-COVID, and that we found that in terms of right-sizing our staffing, what we needed. And so we did present the reductions of 2 teaching positions, a school nurse position, and 3 academic support positions as part of the reduction included in this budget. And if you have any questions about that, I'd be able to answer that. So that's where we started relative to the budget that the board supported. If you see here, it was at 3.45% increase, so roughly a $1.9 million increase that included 1.3, I would say, new requests for expenditures. And I felt also what's important is in this budget is really last year as a separate warrant, the community supported the new teacher's contract, the guild contract, as well as an administrative contract. And so this is all in first year and now second year of the budget. So we were able to move forward with, I would say, a significant increase in health insurance and health benefits, about 12%, plus the guild agreement, and still end up with a budget that was growing at 3.45%. So those reductions were significant in terms of really trying to offset the growth of the budget in terms of expenditures. And I don't know if there's any questions about that. A lot of it, if you could, as I mentioned, there's a significant increase of what drives the budget, and I have it farther down in the presentation. But it really has to do with an investment in plant improvements overall, and also health insurance, which is about $680,000 as well. And that really kind of captured, and our transportation, we are investing in replacing audio and video cameras in our buses, as well as a GPS system. So that was a big part of the increase, as well as cybersecurity and improving data privacy around our IT network. So that really made a bulk of the 1.3. So when you talk about salaries, when you talk about health benefits, transportation improvements, and that really captures most of it, I would say, overall. Yes?
Bond payments? Has the high school bond been paid off, or is it close, or?
I
Seems like
think
it was a
that,
while ago.
yeah, the high school was a while ago. We have, right now, obviously in the middle school,
Yeah.
we have an energy performance that will drop off in 2 years, and also the field, one of the fields are going off.
All right.
Our debt service has been pretty stable overall. When it comes to, the warrant for article for the elementary project, that will change things. If I can, I skipped over that, but maybe if I can go back to that, so we can, it's on the first page, page 2. So warrant article 3 is to appropriate the sum of $9,827,000. And that's to finance the renovations both at Massway and Mohammed. That's the elementary renovation and expansion project. The borrowing for that is really 10 years. If the voters pass in March, supermajority pass that, the first year would be just an interest payment around $243, and I do have handout information for you I can give to you specifically just about tax impact in that information. A lot of this is online on the website, and we've been very, I would say, transparent from the get-go in terms of the impact. So that's the first warrant to be considered. We've had the opportunity to really host recently a series of school tours. For Massway, I would say the biggest impact is expanding the cafeteria, which is now at occupancy levels. It would allow for an additional, I would say, 40+ students to eat there, and have a direct impact on how the lunch schedule works, but also the acoustics. Right now, it's very loud, and part of the renovation of the cafeteria is to actually put in some acoustic tiles, so it's a little bit calmer for our students. In all fairness, it is at full-time lunch with elementary schools in a closed area. But I think what's important is that it allows for a change in how we will drop off, end the day with students in terms of dismissal, coming through the cafeteria. The second part of it is really renovations of space. It's really right-sizing space for the services and programs that are being delivered in those spaces. A perfect example at Massway is that we have OTPT in the stage behind the gym, and students have to walk up to get there, and it's that kind of change. We're creating spaces that really support the learning that's happening, and we're doing it in both schools because we didn't want to just focus in on construction and renovation. So one of the first steps last year when I was hired was to conduct a building condition survey district-wide. We really wanted to assess, and the board was really prioritizing, getting a sense of all the conditions of our buildings for the next 15 years, and be able to come up with a capital plan over a 20-year cycle where we're not just asking for something and doing it without considering the bigger picture of what do we face overall as a system. And I think that's led us to then do a program space audit of our elementary schools, and that's where we found some, I would say, inadequate space. Learning's still happening, things happening there, but there's a lot of things that we've pointed out in this project that aren't optimal for students, and that's what we're trying to accomplish in this project. Any questions about the project?
I have one question about your bond warrant article. Usually, I don't know, maybe you'll do this next year, but you need permission to pay, to utilize the interest from these particular bonds. So I don't see that on here. Is that gonna be like next year?
Well, I will find out. To answer that question, I'll ask our business official how that's worded relative. I will say that bond council approved this, so.
No, there's nothing wrong with
No,
it.
but I just want to make sure if that is something where that, get back to you to say where that is.
Because when we did the bond for this particular building, we never put that in the warrant article. And we had to come back subsequent years to expend the interest because that's not what this says.
Thank you
So-
for pointing that out. So, if there are any Article 3 questions, if I can move on to the other articles, if that's okay? On page, I believe, beginning on page 5. Well, why don't I do this? Why don't I, because I was at the operating budget. So I have an additional handout, I'm going to give this to that as well. So we had a deliberative session, and during the deliberative session, the legislative body voted to actually increase the budget by $519,000 to put back monies overall to the budget. That, what you see in front of you now is the adjusted budget. That was amended at the deliberative session. So, and also the default budget that of $60,463,000 is now, is the same based on just where we're at. In other words, if the budget were not to pass, we would have to find, I think, $1.9 million in reductions overall. And also what I would say publicly is that by the action of the legislative body, now the board has to, if the budget passes on March 10th, would decide what does that mean relative to this adjusted budget. The board made a strong case for the reductions that I described to you in terms of staffing and reductions in plant. But then I think we will say tomorrow night and throughout any meeting in the run-up that we'll wait and see what happens with the budget and start to have that discussion afterwards.
So you've not decided whether or not to keep those positions or to use
Well,
the money?
I think and I don't want to speak for the board, but it's really premature for twofold. One, if the budget is not approved, we would have to not only not consider those positions, but we'd have to consider additional positions and other expenditures. If it is approved, then we need to sit there and say, now, how do we move forward and understand what has changed relative to our recommendations and how that fits into the bills. And I think that's the appropriate, way to approach it. Okay. So there are also 2 warrants for collective bargaining agreements. Warrant 5 is an approval for the voters consider a 3-year contract with our ORPAS, which is our paraeducators, and school nutrition workers. And so that's warrant 5. And then warrant 6 is the warrant to a new collective bargaining agreement with our custodial staff and clerical staff. So certainly we, throughout our conversations with both groups, we support their service and role in our school system and want to make sure that we were able to certainly successfully negotiate new agreements for the next 3 years. And so those are 2 separate warrants to be considered. The board historically, after establishing the Facilities Trust Fund, has had a warrant to assign and appropriate $125,000 to continue to add to that if it is available, and that has, again, no impact on taxes. And then warrant 8, because of there's a lot of public conversation, the board has had and continually to add to the Special Education Trust over the years, and also use that money when we've had higher than expected special education costs. I think one of the things we really looked at this year, for the first 6 months of the year, we were unsure as to whether we would receive our federal entitlement grants. This is something that was very public around, there was a lot of uncertainty. And that uncertainty continues. We were thankfully made whole by the federal government. I think that there's strong, what I would say, voices at the state level across the country to say that budgets were built based on this. There are federal laws and mandated services. But I think in our conversation, we wanted to, if possible, add to the Special Ed Trust to really understand what happens next year if we don't receive that money from the federal government. And coming back, my colleagues coming back from a national conference in Nashville, there's a lot of questions as to how the entitlements may shift in the next few years. And so what has been predictable in terms of costs is somewhat uncertain. And so this warrant, again, has no direct impact on taxes. It's using fund balance to do that. Article 9, if I can. So Article 9, there's been a lot of conversation about an existing open enrollment law. And one of the things that concern the board and we'd like to share with the community is like we believe strongly in local control. That is the ability to kind of use local taxpayer dollars to support the experience of learning in our schools. No one, I would say, on the board and or my professional belief that should in some ways interfere with a family's choice of where they want to educate their child. However, there are direct impacts to the open enrollment law that's been on the books, and we felt strongly, and through this warrant, that we're asking the voters to consider the appropriating of $0 for the purpose of what I would say tuition costs of sending students to other districts. We're not saying that other districts can't accept students and that parents may choose to do that. The impact, though, in terms of how the law is written and what it means relative to that, and I can give you a lot of examples, but right now, the way it is, the law is the district would have to pay up to 80% of the district's per pupil costs to that district, and that's not necessarily simply the way I would say fair relative to districts that don't have high schools, because your costs are calculated differently if you're a district without a high school or other costs. And so the warrant itself that's supported by the board is in the interim to say that not to appropriate. The reason that's important is because there's a lot of case law and history around no means no law, and if a local body is not appropriating it, that can you be forced to. I had the opportunity to testify at the state level, a situation where another district up north created an online academy that is having teachers contracting out to teaching in Indiana for this program. But that would mean that if a student from any of the districts in the state attended that online academy, those communities would be responsible for the open enrollment. And in this particular case, without getting too much, the history of that for-profit school and the company is not very positive in terms of the quality of education. And so that's where I get back to this idea of local control and being able to say we should be able to use taxpayers to invest in our schools and not necessarily in other places. Then for the first time in a long time, there was a series of petition warrants that were considered by the community. And at the deliberative session, and I have to go back to and look on my handout, that I think this, you should be able to cross-reference what's in the presentation as the original warrant, and then the white is what was modified at the deliberative, amended, I should say, at the deliberative session. So the warrant article, now we can see, 11 was, is still as it is about the retention of year-end unassigned funds. Warrant Article 12, which is a petition warrant article for a tax cap, that was amended. So it went from what was presented to, I think, regional CPI to 15% above the amount. So that was changed there. I don't know if there are any questions about that. Petition warrant article 13 was for the purpose of conducting a independent audit, performance audit for the school district, and that was originally at $60,000 in the warrant, and that was amended to be by the legislative body for $100.
Can you speak to article number 10?
I apologize,
That's the budget.
The budget committee, thank you for that. So the budget committee, there's a law that this would be an elected budget committee, that is not an advisory committee. It actually, the law is very clear in terms of the RSA, that this group would be elected, they would be somewhat independent, there would be one, it would be equal to the size of the school board, and one board member, but they would have outside authority to create a act. There's a lot of conversation about this. The board, as it's stated here, does not support that. I would say, from my perspective, the board has 4 functions as a school board. That is to hire and evaluate the superintendent, it's to oversee program curriculum, it's to propose budgets and that, and policy. And so, in this, the article itself here would actually move that responsibility in totality to a budget committee. And there's a lot of conversation about that, why there has been, the trust in the board's responsibility and administration's to build budgets. So that's out there as well.
So this is not advisory,
It's not.
it's not advisory?
It's not.
I understand.
I would say it's not advisory from the sense that these are elected people. They have, through that RSA, a direct authority to kind of make decisions. Obviously, there's this issue of override by the majority of the board, but the language is very specific. So that's a really summary of the warrants and the budget. I don't know if there's any particular questions you have.
Maybe this is for your chair, but I guess when you had your deliberative session, there seemed to be I don't want to say an outcry, but a resistance to some of the things that you're doing in terms of costs. Can one of you speak to that? Is that something the board is looking at? I know you guys look at, keep it as low as possible, but there's a contingent out there that seems to think that it should be lower. I don't know if one of you can speak to that.
I would be happy to say this. I mean, obviously, the board's goals and certainly the administration goals was to be mindful of the taxpayer. We recognize that we're not creating these budgets in a vacuum. Also, our starting point is to roll over based on, is to really look at enrollment and, a program and say, where do we go from there? And where are in terms of the $1.3 million of new requests, I gave examples of healthcare, health insurance, things like that, or safety in terms of buses. So it's really to limit the impact relative to increasing the budget. And I think that's why I emphasized the reduction of $1 million. This is the second year in a row that where we started in the process, we eliminated last year $1.1 million to be mindful of the taxpayers, and this year we did about the same. The overall budget, if you look over the last 10-year period, is really right at CPI. It's been at 3.3, 3.65% in this budget as well. So I think, I would say is that whereas we're mindful, certainly respectful of the taxpayers, this is consistent with being mindful of that. And really, the 2 biggest drivers of our budget, close to 80%, are salaries and benefits. And so with the committee last year agreed to the new teacher's contract based on investing in our teachers, and that we've been able to manage $1.1 million of additional money without changing salaries. So that's an example where by reducing positions in the year before and hiring replacements, we were able to not grow as exponential relative to what the real dollar value is. And that's hard to do. So I think we've tried to say publicly that that's where it starts in terms of understanding the impact. And similarly with the construction project, we know that we have to have a compelling reason to ask people. One is to be strategic, as I mentioned, look at the big view, but be very deliberate in bringing the cost of this down. And the reality is we've run out of space. The Massway cafeteria has been at occupancy. We've talked about it, moving that wall, and it's only going to become more expensive over time. But to say, how do we minimize the impact on, as I mentioned, we have some debt coming off in the next couple of years. We believe we've got a favorable interest rate in 10-year borrowing. And so it's trying to be transparent in terms of the impact of that project around the assessed valuation and having those conversations. Amanda, how about you?
No, I think that was just trying to balance what we need to do versus what we want to do without hurting the students' experience and the education that they're getting.
The reason I asked the question is because we're experiencing the same kind of thing. At some point, the taxpayer is going to say no. And Barrington Deerfield experiences that, for the last 7 years or something?
I think we're going on 11.
11 years now, default budget, which, causes all kinds of problems. But at some point, the taxpayer is going to say no. And I would hate for the town and or the school district to get to that point, because that basically says, hey, we don't trust you. We don't wanna spend this much money, so.
I will say also, it is interesting in terms of the contribution at the state level, but more so a series of mandates that come in that forced us in respects to increase the budget. And we've been very vocal about that in terms of without any kind of voice in that. There are certain things that have added to this budget around program and curriculum materials that we have to include, right? And so if the budget were not to pass, we still have to include some materials, and so we're gonna have to make reductions in other areas to ensure that we maintain our commitment to the mandates. And so,
The school district doesn't like unfunded mandates either, do they?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to ask you is in terms of funding. The state is notorious for its underfunding of education. Do you see any changes in that in the legislature, or what are you seeing?
So I'll say this, I was very proud of, and the board supported being part of the legal challenge that just was completed in terms of the state level decision that validated what we all know. That is sitting with the governor and the legislature. They have a responsibility, I believe, to act on the determination by the judge. And I would be, trying to remain optimistic as to say, the judge was very clear on the remedy. We hadn't seen it yet. And I think that's the best hope we can have relative to understanding what is an adequate education. At the same time, the legislature, through the 306s, has watered down a lot of what is included in adequacy around what is part of an education. And so there's a lot of things happening at the same time, but I think it has to start to say is what is the state's obligation per the Constitution to provide an adequate education to all children.
Well, if you see any developments, I would appreciate it if you let our town administrator know, so we can be aware of what's happening there. But that would be much appreciated. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Any other questions or any
I have a question, and
Sure.
it comes back again to the tuition students, because I get that asked quite a lot from people in the town of Lee. Is you have a figure that you charge for tuition at this point? And is it exactly what it costs?
So you're speaking in Barrington, really?
Yes, I am.
So the Barrington agreement is really calculated on a per pupil expense and a percentage they pay. For them right now, it's over 21,000 per student that is part of the agreement. And you have to understand is they're paying for the entire per pupil of the district, but they're only really using the high school. So I think in fairness, it is not 100% our per pupil cost, but it's very close relative to even, I would say now, it's higher than through the open enrollment when an 80% contribution would be coming in. I think it gets back to what was the original agreement. These are open seats that we have available. It provides consistency. It's totally right now $3.4 million in revenue coming in. And so I would say it's relatively close to what our per pupil cost is, but they're paying for the whole system. So for example, if we invest at the elementary and that impacts our borrowing, things like that, that goes into our per pupil cost. That is in some ways translated to Barrington, even though they're paying for the high school experience. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Anything else about education related? Anything
Anybody from the audience have any questions?
other than the importance of writing and comprehension and and holding a book, right? I agree.
No more other questions? Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I will get back to you on that interest. I'm just curious about that now.
Just check, I don't know, it's not required anymore, but yeah, that's what kind of held us up here, because we had a bond that we floated. And then during the course, you pay things out, but that's still, that particular amount is still getting interest. And you need to ask permission of the legislative body to expend that interest. So, but yeah, I think it's still intact, but I don't know, you could do it next year maybe or something.
Thank you into that tomorrow night.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
All right, regular business, town administrator.
Okay, start with the good stuff.
Nice job,
Update on
thank you.
the town clerk, tax collector position. We have hired a person for the town clerk tax collector. I believe it's okay to release that name at this point. Yeah, it's Diane Fouette, who is a Lee resident, actually a neighbor of the town clerk. They actually didn't have much acquaintance before the interview process, but I believe she's coming on April. Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Okay.
No,
She's coming on tomorrow.
Wow, there you
There
go.
was some discussion as to when exactly she would start, and that is with an eye towards Linda leaving in June, so.
And she has to go through a series of classes to become,
She has to go to classes, Linda's gonna do some training with her, she's going to take some of the non-mandatory courses, but the Town Clerk Tax Collectors Association runs some very specific clinics. The state actually likes you to be in position as an assistant for a few months before they bring you in for training, because they want you to understand how their software works and
okay.
have some understanding before they sit you down. 2025 audit report. We did receive the audit. I have some significant disagreement with the audit, as does our accounting and finance contractor. I'm meeting with Christian later this week. As near as I can tell, there were some expenditure lines that were not offset. Things like the police cruiser, where we're going to purchase a cruiser and use money from the duty line. There was a conservation grant that was just listed as an expenditure on the expenditure lines. A couple of other things. I also have some concern about we had a $200,000 library amount. It was a warrant article that DRA, because it was not approved by the select board, made me put in the budget as an expenditure item. That was explained that was offset by the warrant article, even though the accounting ended up the way it was, that does not appear to have been recognized by the auditors.
The one thing I have a question, and it wasn't on your list, is the unassigned fund balance is at 1.7 million, and we were told it was over 2.
That
So-
is another significant difference.
Okay.
Our accounting firm is saying that we are over 2.2 million.
So why are they telling us that it's 1.7? So I guess, put that on your list if you
That
could.
is on my list and has been communicated to,
Okay. And this is still Plotchik and Sanderson, right?
it is.
So what the heck's wrong with them? That would be my ultimate question, what the heck's wrong with them? And you can quote me on that.
I believe that will be MRI's ultimate question along with mine. So,
Okay, all right, fair enough.
I will be back to the board very shortly on that.
Okay.
A few things under miscellaneous. The Energy Commission would like to do a free energy audit on basically the town hall, library, and annex center. This is one of the few areas that has not had, the library has an upgraded light of sorts on the front. The town hall does not, the annex does not. It's not particularly well lit. I spoke with Luke Rondon 2 weeks ago, and he has a company that would do a free audit and would also look to providing possibly free lighting upgrade. So I said that as long as it was free, I didn't imagine that the select board or the library trustees would have an issue, at least with the audit part, and then they would move forward with the.
That's a Yankee thing, if it's free, it's gotta be free, right?
Don't question.
Also under miscellaneous, the revaluation process is underway. That'll start ramping up in April. Denise has put some information on the web. I put some information on social media. We have handouts available at the town office. I believe there's some at the library too. Residents will start receiving mailings end of February into March about the process and what's coming.
And just make sure, and I think we kind of cleared it up before, I think it was something that you brought up, Rebecca.
Oh,
But make sure they have IDs and
Yes,
when they do their audits.
Oh, yeah, so don't walk
In-house
in.
audits.
we had a preliminary revaluation meeting with 2 DRA representatives and 3 MRI representatives about how the process is going to unfold. And I can say just after the first meeting, I think we're in a much better place than the last reval. And I came in on the end of that, but they are sort of preempting all the concerns that arose during the last reval ahead of schedule, so.
So that will save us some money, because we won't have to buy the aspirin for Denise. For headaches that it costs.
That
Jeez.
may well,
Oh my goodness.
and speaking of Denise, that was the other thing. Denise has put a tremendous amount of time into the town report and the voter's guide. Both are off at the printers now after multiple passes of multiple people using their editing skills, but Denise has really gone over and above on the time she's put into those.
Okay, and where will they be available again? Right,
Was
the town offices,
I
of
think
course.
the voter's guide is gonna get mailed out or be in mailboxes by next Monday, I can't remember which.
Okay.
And then the town report obviously has to be here a week prior to voting.
Okay.
And we'll have it at the library. Typically, we put it at the transfer station as well. For people that spend time out of their cars, they'll be in front of the window by the office. And we'll have them at the town office, particularly at the town clerk's office is probably the most heavily accessed.
Just since you're on miscellaneous, I don't know if you got any more about miscellaneous. I don't go to the transfer station that often, but once again, the display is not,
Oh, that TV?
it's on, but there's
I
nothing
just
being
fixed
displayed.
that.
Well,
I mean, I have to fix it all the time, but
As of Saturday, it was, or,
I was this last Saturday, yes.
yeah, okay.
And been for like 3 weeks, but yeah, it was, it showed, like the login screen, that was it. That was it, nothing was happening.
yeah, when we have surges,
Does it have a UPS or something on it, so it doesn't?
it's,
It does. It has a new upgraded UBS that we put in last year that was supposed to prevent this from happening.
Okay.
It may well be Comcast did a series of upgrades that knocked out our internet and our phone service at several buildings, so it may have something to do with that this time around.
Well, I guess, and I know, probably I should be talking to the
You can impress upon
DPW.
Chip that he should call us.
Well,
when he
that's
comes
the
up.
thing, I was gonna
There-
say, can we request that, because they're there.
we do, and Joe usually does a good job of
Okay.
letting me know when it's down.
Okay.
But I did
I
not
just-
get this last one.
We've got it there to share information, and if it's not
Yep.
sharing information,
Particularly this time of year, we want it.
yeah, yeah.
The one other thing I would mention before you go to the consent agenda, Karen Kilcup, who is in your consent agenda, is here this evening. If you, I think she's
Want to
introduced
ask her?
herself to some of you, but if you wanted to know who you were appointing, she's here. And
Sure, if
Made
you'd
a-
like
made a
to speak
point
to
to be
us.
here.
Sure, you don't have to if you don't want to.
48 years of teaching in public higher education, mostly, some private. I taught at the academy for a little bit too, but I've taught environmental and sustainability studies and among my other subjects. So I have a keen interest in helping out the committee, and they were very welcoming. I went to the last meeting, it was great,
Excellent, excellent.
yeah.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Eden?
I have nothing else.
All right. Anything anybody wants to pull from consent agenda?
No.
So I move to accept the consent agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions, any discussions, or no? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Fortunately, there's a large number of signatures required.
Oh, my God.
Okay, I need to know, from the last time that we were here, this whole road race thing, this isn't the same group, right?
I was right.
You were right, okay.
So I had paid Denise $1.
$1?
Why did you pay for $1?
Did you report that to the IRS? for
Because she said that the
revenue?
police chief and I were incorrect and that she recalled correctly.
Ooh.
And I took her bet.
But the chief didn't cough up anything? Oh. Okay.
He got out the door
No,
before
he
she.
ran out of here before I had a chance to.
Did they fix it? Have you talked about fixing the road?
They're just gonna move to another, I don't know what they haven't told me what they decided to do, but they
Okay.
saw the problem and they're gonna fix
Figure
it
it
on their
out.
own, yeah.
That's
So
good.
this is a different one, the one that's on here.
Yeah, no, I was just curious if they fixed it.
I could be too.
This is the one that I recommended.
Yes.
while you're signing, I'll mention, in discussions with the fire chief last week and this week, he has had several applicants for the full-time position that look promising, so.
Yeah, I like the ad that was out there. That was a good ad. Old business, nothing, new business.
Under new business, per discussion generated by an email from Katrin, I had just added at the last minute congressionally directed spending, and both Katrin, myself, I assume every other town administrator in the district, got communication from Senator Shaheen last week about the congressionally directed spending funds that are going to be available with sample applications. I had actually talked with Karen Rossi last week about this, about whether we should consider applying either for the town hall or for purchase of the town office. Katrin, having had more experience in procuring congressionally directed spending than myself, thought that the renovation of the town hall would be more likely to see funding than the purchase of a town office building. And that's something that's fairly cut and dry. There's not necessarily any rhyme or reason as to how they grant these.
Well, but hopefully, if the board decides to apply, that we have the same experience Barrington had, that you ask for amount X and they get twice as much. But, you know, I don't know. But yeah, so maybe something, because we know back in 2020, we did the whole estimate for repairing all the things that are done, or need to be done with that particular thing. So I don't know if maybe, if Katrin's gonna take this on as her project, because it has to be done by, you said, March 6th?
Yes.
So maybe she and maybe you and Mr. Tappan can get together and, because he has the information from when we did the last assessment. Of course, things have gone up. That was like 6 years ago.
I believe Mr. Tappan has shared that with me prior to going into the town office too, but.
Okay, all right. So maybe if the board's amenable, if you're amenable to us putting it in our application,
Sure.
Absolutely.
I like
it doesn't have to be exact.
No?
because-
it-
Yeah.
This is a little more, a lot of the federal programs require that you have a plan that's, right down to ready to sign and stick a shovel in the dirt, and this is not that way. I know my hometown last year got, strangely enough, got a congressionally directed spending grant for a new fire truck for $930,000, so. Of which they thought they had no chance of getting.
Jeez.
And we should have stole theirs and.
I know.
You could, because we don't necessarily have a fire station that it fits
Oh,
in.
no.
Buy the wrong color.
Yeah, wrong color.
No, let's not go there.
It's red and black with a deer on the side of it, so. yeah.
So I guess if the board's amenable, we will direct Mr. Robertson and Ms. Casper and Mr. Tappan, if he's amenable, to work on the application.
For the town hall
Get in
option.
For the town hall option, and submit the application on or before March 6, 2026.
Sounds like a
We okay
plan.
with that?
Yeah.
We're good.
Do we need a motion, or what do you think?
Motions are always good, particularly on the microphone. It helps with the minutes.
So moved.
So moved, there you
So
go,
moved.
there you go, so
Wow.
moved. Any discussion?
No.
No, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Was that an aye, Rebecca?
It was an aye,
It was aye.
yes.
Motion passes. So thank you for you doing that, that would be most appreciated, so.
We'll see where it goes.
I assume, Mr. Chapman, you're willing to work with them? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Anything else for the cause?
Just an announcement at this point, the planning board had a public hearing on the master plan. It did pass with some minor corrections at this point, so now we have a master plan, goes from 2026 to 2036.
Good, excellent, thank them. Anything else?
No.
So I move to adjourn the meeting, do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
It's a well-attended meeting.
Nothing? You just here,
Saying that.
because you're lonely downstairs, or?